Admiral Kyung-ho stood on the bridge of his flagship watching Earth grow larger on the main screen, and he felt the familiar rush of another easy victory coming his way. His fleet of 1,000 warships had conquered 847 worlds before this one, and none had lasted more than 6 hours against the might of the Galactic Empire. The blue and green planet looked peaceful and defenseless just like all the others, and he expected the humans to surrender as soon as they saw his massive fleet blocking out their sun. Captain Dongmin walked up to him with a datapad showing the standard invasion protocol, and Kyung-ho nodded his approval without really looking at it. They had done this so many times that everyone knew their jobs perfectly. The communications officer would demand surrender. The humans would either give up immediately or try to fight back with their primitive weapons, and then it would all be over before lunchtime. "Open a channel to the planet," Kyung-ho ordered, and he straightened his uniform as the main screen switched to show the interior of some kind of human government building. A middle-aged human male sat behind a desk covered with stacks of paper, and filing cabinets lined the walls behind him. The human looked completely calm, as if 1,000 alien warships had not just appeared in his sky. "I am Admiral Kyung-ho of the Galactic Empire," he announced in his most commanding voice. "Your world is now under Imperial rule, and you have 1 hour to surrender unconditionally, or we will begin orbital bombardment." This speech had worked perfectly on every other world, and he expected the human to either faint from fear or start begging for mercy. Instead, the human smiled politely and picked up a pen from his desk. "Hello, Admiral. I am Director Jin Woo of the United Earth Compliance Office, and thank you for contacting us today. Before we can process your request for planetary conquest, I need you to fill out Form 2847B, which is our standard request for invasion permit application." Kyung-ho stared at the screen in confusion because no one had ever asked him to fill out forms before. "What are you talking about? This is not a request. This is a demand for surrender." Jinwoo continued smiling and pulled out a thick stack of papers from one of his filing cabinets. "I understand your position, Admiral, but according to Interstellar Treaty 445C, all military actions against inhabited worlds must be properly documented with the appropriate permits. Form 2847B requires you to provide detailed environmental impact assessments for each planned bombardment site, cultural preservation protocols for the local population, economic integration proposals with supporting financial data, and current health and safety certifications for all your invasion personnel." The Admiral felt his eye twitch because this was not how invasions were supposed to work. "Human, you seem to be confused about the situation here. We have 1,000 warships, and you have nothing. Surrender now, or we will destroy your cities." "Oh my," Jinwoo said, and he flipped through several pages of what looked like a massive rulebook. "I'm afraid that would be quite illegal without proper permits. You see, Earth has signed mutual defense treaties with 412 different species, and according to Article 7, Section 3 of the Galactic Convention on Military Engagement, any unpermitted attack on our world would constitute an act of aggression against all our treaty partners." Kyung-ho turned to his legal officer, Captain Subin, who was frantically typing on her computer terminal. "Is any of this real?" he demanded. Subin looked up with worry on her face. "Sir, I am checking our legal database now, and it appears that many of these treaties do exist. I am not sure how Earth managed to get so many species to sign them, but they seem to be legitimate documents." Back on the screen, Jinwoo was still talking in his cheerful voice. "Now, if you would like to proceed with your invasion plans, I just need you to download Form 2847B from our planetary network. It is only 47 pages long, and most sections are quite straightforward. Once you complete that, you can submit it to our Invasion Review Committee along with the required supporting documentation." "Supporting documentation?" Kyung-ho asked, despite himself. "Yes, indeed," Jinwoo replied, and he pulled out another stack of papers. "You will need Form 3421A for Environmental Impact Assessment, Form 3421B for Cultural Preservation Plan, Form 3421C for Economic Integration Proposal, Form 4455D for Health and Safety Compliance, and Form 5566E for Psychological Impact on Local Population. Each form comes with its own instruction manual and reference guide." The Admiral looked around his bridge and saw his officers staring at the screen with the same confused expression he probably had on his own face. Captain Dongmin leaned over to whisper in his ear, "Sir, what are your orders?" Kyung-ho had no idea what his orders should be because this situation was not covered in any Imperial military manual. Every other species had either surrendered immediately or fought back with weapons. Nobody had ever asked him to fill out paperwork before. How long does this permit process take? He found himself asking. Jin-Woo consulted what looked like a scheduling calendar on his desk. Well, Form 2847B typically takes 2 to 3 weeks to process once we receive all the required documentation. Then it goes to our environmental review board, which meets once a month, followed by our cultural preservation committee, which meets quarterly. After that, assuming no appeals are filed, the Economic Integration Committee needs to review your proposal, and they have a 6-month backlog right now. 6 months? Kyung-ho shouted. This is ridiculous. We are not going to wait 6 months to conquer one primitive planet. I certainly understand your frustration, Admiral, Jin-Woo said in the same calm voice. However, I should mention that attempting to bypass our permit process would result in significant penalties and fees. According to Regulation 7734DX, unauthorized military action against a compliance office member world carries a fine of 50 million galactic credits per day, plus legal costs. Captain Subin was typing even faster now, and her face had gone completely pale. "Sir," she whispered urgently, "I found the regulation he mentioned and it appears to be legitimate. 50 million credits per day would bankrupt the entire Imperial fleet in less than a month." Kyung-ho felt a headache starting behind his eyes as he tried to understand how his simple invasion had turned into a discussion about permits and fines. This is insane. We have never needed permits to conquer planets before. That is entirely possible, Admiral, Jin-Woo agreed politely. However, Earth only recently established our compliance office, and we have been working hard to help other species understand proper interstellar legal procedures. We have actually sent helpful information packets to over 800 worlds explaining how they can file appeals against unauthorized conquests that may have occurred in the past. The blood drained from Kyung-ho's face as he realized what the human was really saying. 800 worlds was almost exactly the number of planets the Empire had conquered over the past 5 centuries. You sent legal advice to our conquered territories? Oh yes, we believe very strongly in making sure everyone understands their rights under interstellar law, Jin-Woo replied cheerfully. We have had such wonderful response too. Just last week we received over 3,000 requests for assistance with filing proper appeal paperwork. Captain Dongmin grabbed Kyung-ho's arm and pointed at his communication console, which was blinking with dozens of incoming priority messages. Sir, we are receiving emergency transmissions from Imperial Command. Something about legal challenges being filed against conquest operations on multiple worlds. Kyung-ho closed his eyes and tried to make sense of what was happening to his perfectly normal invasion. Somehow these humans had managed to turn the entire Galactic Empire into defendants in some kind of massive legal case, and all they had used were forms and regulations that he had never heard of before. When he opened his eyes again, Jin-Woo was still smiling at him from the screen and holding up a pen. So, Admiral, would you like me to send you that Form 2847B to get started? I think once you see how straightforward our process is, you will find it much more civilized than all that unpleasant bombing and shooting. 3 months had passed since Admiral Kyung-ho first encountered Director Jin-Woo and his forms, and the Admiral was beginning to understand why some of his colleagues had started drinking heavily during their off-duty hours. His mighty invasion fleet now orbited Earth like a collection of expensive paperweights, while an army of clerks and administrators tried to make sense of humanity's legal system. Lieutenant Tae-yong knocked on the Admiral's office door and entered with yet another stack of completed forms in his arms. The young officer had been promoted to head of the newly created Imperial Paperwork Division after showing unusual skill at reading fine print and interpreting bureaucratic language. His uniform was wrinkled, and he had dark circles under his eyes from working 18-hour days trying to keep up with Earth's documentation requirements. Sir, I have completed Form 2847B as requested, Tae-yong reported, and he set the thick document down on Kyung-ho's desk. However, there appears to be a problem. Kyung-ho looked up from his own pile of paperwork with tired eyes. What kind of problem, Lieutenant? Well, sir, when I submitted the completed form to Earth's compliance office, they sent back 3 additional forms that are apparently required before they can process our original application, Taeyong explained, and he pulled out more papers from his briefcase. Form 2847B1 is a supplementary environmental impact assessment. Form 2847B2 is an additional cultural sensitivity review. And Form 2847B3 is something called a preliminary invasion justification statement. The Admiral rubbed his temples and tried to keep his voice calm. How long are these additional forms? Form 2847B1 is 63 pages. Form 2847B2 is 41 pages. And Form 2847B3 is 78 pages, sir, Taeyong replied. But that is not the worst part. There is a worst part? Yes, sir. According to the instructions, each of these forms requires its own supporting documentation, which means we need to fill out Forms 3421A through 3421Z, Forms 4455A through 4455M, and Forms 5566A through 5566R. That is a total of 64 additional forms. Kyung-ho stared at the lieutenant in horror. 64 more forms? How is that even possible? It gets worse, sir, Taeyong continued. I spoke with Specialist Hee-jin from Earth's documentation department, and she explained that each completed form automatically generates additional forms that need to be filled out. She called it their cascading documentation protocol, and she seemed quite proud of it. Before the Admiral could respond, Captain Subin entered the office carrying her own armload of papers. Her usually perfect uniform was disheveled, and she had what looked like coffee stains on her sleeve. Sir, I have unfortunate news about our legal situation. More forms? Kyung-ho asked weakly. No, sir. This time it is about the forms we have already submitted, Subin replied. Earth's compliance office has rejected our Form 3421A environmental impact assessment because we failed to include proper soil sample analysis from each proposed bombardment site. Kyung-ho felt his eyes start twitching again. They want us to land on their planet and collect dirt samples before we can get permission to bomb it? That appears to be correct, sir, Subin confirmed. However, in order to land personnel to collect soil samples, we need to file Form 6677C, which is a request for limited surface access during hostile operations. This form requires its own environmental impact assessment, which creates what Earth officials call a procedural loop. A what? A procedural loop, sir. It means we need permission to get the information we need to get permission. Specialist Hye-jin seemed to think it was quite clever. Lieutenant Taeyong cleared his throat. Sir, there is more bad news. I received a communication from Imperial Command this morning, and they are demanding to know why we have not conquered Earth yet. When I tried to explain about the forms, they ordered me to send copies of all our paperwork to Imperial headquarters for review. Admiral Kyung-ho felt something break inside his mind as he imagined trying to explain 64 forms and cascading documentation protocols to Imperial Command. How many pages of paperwork do we have so far? Current count is 4,732 pages, sir, Taeyong replied. But that number goes up every day as we receive new forms and requirements. Captain Subin pulled out her datapad and showed it to the Admiral. Sir, I have been monitoring communications from other Imperial fleets, and it appears that Earth's legal advice packets are having significant impact across the Empire. 23 conquered worlds have filed formal appeals against their occupation, and another 47 have submitted requests for independence based on improper conquest documentation. Improper conquest documentation? Kyung-ho repeated. Yes, sir. Apparently when the Empire conquered those worlds centuries ago, we failed to file proper intent to conquer forms or obtain environmental impact permits or submit cultural preservation plans. According to Earth's legal experts, this makes our entire conquest of those worlds technically illegal under our own imperial laws. The Admiral stood up and walked to his window, which showed Earth floating peacefully below them. Somewhere down on that planet, Director Jin-woo was probably sitting at his desk with his stacks of forms and his cheerful smile, slowly destroying the Galactic Empire one piece of paperwork at a time. Sir, Lieutenant Taeyong said quietly. What are your orders? Kyung-ho turned back to his officers and saw the exhaustion and confusion in their faces. These were trained military personnel who had spent their entire careers following clear orders and fighting straightforward battles. They were not equipped to handle an enemy that attacked with filing cabinets and regulation manuals. Contact Specialist Hae-jin, he ordered finally. Tell her we need to schedule a meeting to discuss our paperwork situation. What kind of meeting, sir? Subin asked. I do not know, Captain. Whatever kind of meeting requires the fewest forms. 2 hours later, Admiral Kyung-ho found himself sitting in his conference room across from a small human woman who looked like she could be someone's grandmother. Specialist Hae-jin had arrived by shuttle carrying several briefcases full of documents, and she seemed genuinely excited to meet with Imperial officers. Admiral, it is such a pleasure to finally meet you in person, she said warmly as she unpacked her papers. Director Jinwoo sends his regards and he wanted me to give you this. She handed him a certificate that read, Outstanding Participation in Interstellar Bureaucratic Procedures with his name written in fancy letters. Thank you, Kyung-ho said automatically, not sure what else to say. Now then, Hae-jin continued, I understand you are having some difficulties with our documentation requirements. That is perfectly normal for first-time applicants, and I am here to help guide you through the process. Lieutenant Taeyong leaned forward eagerly. Specialist Hee-jin, we are having trouble understanding the procedural loop situation with Form 6677C. Is there any way to resolve this issue? Hee-jin nodded sympathetically. Oh yes, that is a common problem. The solution is quite simple, actually. You need to file Form 6667C, Exception, which allows you to request an exception to the standard procedure for obtaining surface access permits. How long is Form 6677C Exception? Captain Subin asked. Only 93 pages, Hee-jin replied cheerfully. Much shorter than the standard form. Of course, the exception form does require you to provide detailed justification for why you cannot follow normal procedures, which means you need to submit Form 7788D for procedural exception justification. Admiral Kyung-ho felt his headache getting worse. How many pages is Form 7788D? 112 pages, Admiral, but it includes very helpful examples of properly formatted justification statements. And what forms does Form 7788D require? He asked with growing dread. Specialist Hee-jin smiled brightly and pulled out a thick manual from one of her briefcases. I am so glad you asked. Form 7788D triggers our Extended Documentation Protocol, which requires Forms 8899A through 8899P, plus Forms 9900X, 9900Y, and 9900Z. That is only 19 additional forms, and most of them are quite straightforward. Lieutenant Taeyong made a small whimpering sound, and Captain Subin started laughing, in a way that sounded slightly hysterical. Admiral Kyung-ho stared at the growing pile of forms on his conference table and realized that he was trapped in some kind of bureaucratic nightmare from which there might be no escape. Admiral Kyung-ho thought he had reached the bottom of his bureaucratic nightmare until the day Captain Subin burst into his office with pure panic written across her face and a communication device clutched in her shaking hands. 6 months of dealing with Earth's paperwork had turned his efficient military officers into nervous wrecks who jumped at shadows and muttered about forms in their sleep. Sir, we have a serious problem, Subin announced, and she activated the communication device without waiting for permission. Emergency transmission from Imperial Command. The holographic image of General In-ho appeared above the device, and his face was red with anger. Admiral Kyung-ho, what is the meaning of this bureaucratic disaster you have created? Half the Empire is in rebellion, and they are all blaming Earth's legal advice packets for their problems. Kyung-ho straightened his uniform and tried to look professional despite the stacks of unfinished forms covering every surface in his office. General, the situation here is more complicated than our initial reports indicated. The humans have developed some unusual defensive strategies that we were not prepared for. Unusual defensive strategies, General In-ho shouted. They filed a tax audit against the entire Galactic Empire. Do you understand what that means, Admiral? Before Kyung-ho could respond, The communication was interrupted by a new voice that sounded calm and professional. General Inho, this is Auditor General Wu Jin from Earth's Interstellar Revenue Service, and I need to speak with you about some irregularities we have discovered in your imperial tax filings. The general's face turned an even deeper shade of red. We do not pay taxes to Earth. We are the Galactic Empire, and we take what we want from conquered worlds. I understand your position, General, Wu Jin replied politely. But according to our records, the Galactic Empire has never filed proper intent to conquer documentation for any of your territorial acquisitions over the past 5 centuries. This creates some interesting legal complications regarding the ownership status of your conquered territories. Agent Mi Young's voice joined the conversation, and she sounded almost excited. General, we have been conducting a comprehensive audit of Imperial operations under Form 9999, which is our comprehensive operational review for military actions against bureaucratically advanced civilizations. Our preliminary findings suggest that your entire empire may be operating without proper legal foundation. Kyung-ho watched General In-ho's face cycle through several different colors as the implications of this statement became clear. Lieutenant Tae-yong entered the office at that moment carrying yet another stack of papers, and he stopped dead when he saw the communication in progress. What kind of legal foundation? General In-ho demanded. Commissioner Hyun-woo's voice answered this time, and he sounded like an accountant who had just discovered the most interesting mathematical problem in the galaxy. Well, General, when your empire first began expanding 500 years ago, did you file Form 1111 Alpha for establishment of interstellar political entity? What about Form 22222 Beta for registration of military organization? Did anyone submit Form 3333 Gamma for declaration of territorial expansion? Intent? We do not know what any of those forms are, General In-ho replied through gritted teeth. That is what we suspected, Hyun-woo continued cheerfully. According to Interstellar Revenue Code Section 4455, failure to file proper establishment documentation means that your empire has been operating as an unregistered business entity for 5 centuries. The penalties and back taxes for this violation are quite substantial. Agent Mi Young's voice took over again, and she sounded like she was reading from a very long list. Our calculations show that you owe approximately 47 trillion galactic credits in unlicensed territorial expansion fees, improper conquest penalties, late filing charges, interest on unpaid taxes, and administrative costs for processing your audit. General In-ho made a choking sound and sat down heavily in his chair. 47 trillion credits? That is more money than exists in the entire galaxy. Not quite, General, Auditor General Wu Jin corrected politely. Our economists estimate that 47 trillion credits represents approximately 63% of the total galactic economy. However, we are prepared to discuss payment plan options if you are unable to pay the full amount immediately. Captain Subin leaned over to whisper in Admiral Kyung-ho's ear. Sir, how is this even possible? Earth is just one planet with no military power. How did they manage to audit the entire galactic empire? Before Kyung-ho could respond, another voice joined the conversation, and this one belonged to Captain Seung-ho from the Imperial Fleet Operations Center. General In-ho, we are receiving similar audit notifications from revenue services on 43 different worlds. They are all demanding documentation for our conquest operations in their sectors. 43 worlds? The general repeated weakly. Yes, sir. And the number is growing every hour. Earth's Interstellar Revenue Service appears to have trained audit teams on hundreds of conquered worlds, and they are all conducting simultaneous reviews of Imperial operations in their territories. Agent Mi Young sounded pleased with this development. That is correct, Captain Sung-ho. We have been working very hard to help other species understand proper audit procedures and tax law compliance. Our training program has been quite successful. Lieutenant Tae-yong cleared his throat nervously. Sir, I hate to interrupt, but I have been monitoring communications from our conquered territories, and the situation is getting worse. 78 worlds have now filed formal independence declarations based on improper conquest documentation. How are they filing independence declarations? General In-ho demanded. They are using Form 555 Independence, which Earth's legal experts helped them prepare, Tae-yong explained. According to the form instructions, any territory conquered without proper documentation can declare independence by submitting appropriate paperwork to the original conquering authority. Auditor General Wu Jin's voice took on an educational tone. General, this is actually a very standard procedure under interstellar law. When a conquest is conducted without following proper legal protocols, the conquered territory has the right to file for retroactive independence. We have been providing free legal assistance to help various species understand their rights, Commissioner Hyunwoo added helpfully. We also helped them calculate the damages they can claim for unlawful occupation. Most worlds are requesting compensation for 5 centuries of unpaid taxes, resource extraction fees, and emotional distress damages. The total amount comes to approximately 137 trillion galactic credits. General Inho stood up abruptly and started pacing back and forth. This is impossible. We cannot owe 184 trillion galactic credits. That money does not exist. Actually, General, our combined calculations show that you owe approximately 215 trillion galactic credits when we include the 47 trillion for imperial establishment violations, the 137 trillion for territorial damages, and 31 trillion in processing fees and administrative costs. Agent Mi Young corrected. Captain Sung Ho's voice became urgent. General, I am receiving priority communications from Imperial Treasury. They report that our military budget has been frozen pending resolution of tax audit issues. All fleet operations are suspended until we can provide proof of legal authority to conduct military activities. Admiral Kyung Ho felt a strange sense of relief washing over him as he realized that his invasion of Earth was no longer his most serious problem. The entire galactic empire was being dismantled by accountants and tax collectors, and there was nothing any of them could do about it except fill out more forms. General Inho, Auditor General Wu Jin said in his calm professional voice, we understand this situation may seem overwhelming, but we are here to help you through the compliance process. We have prepared Form 9999 settlement, which allows you to negotiate payment terms for your outstanding tax obligations. How long is Form 9999 settlement? General Inho asked in defeat. Only 417 pages, General, and it includes helpful worksheets for calculating your monthly payment options. We also have Form 99999 bankruptcy, if you prefer to explore insolvency proceedings instead. Lieutenant Taeyong raised his hand tentatively. Excuse me, but what happens if we just refuse to pay any of these fees or fill out any more forms? There was a moment of silence before Commissioner Hyunwoo answered in a tone that somehow managed to sound both polite and terrifying. Well, Lieutenant, refusal to comply with audit requirements would result in additional penalties under Form 88888, non-compliance. We would also be forced to refer your case to our collections department, which handles enforcement actions for uncooperative taxpayers. What kind of enforcement actions? Captain Subin asked nervously. Oh, the usual procedures, Hyunwoo replied cheerfully. Asset seizure, wage garnishment, property liens, business license revocation, and criminal prosecution for tax evasion. Our collections department is very thorough and they have an excellent success rate. Admiral Kyung Ho looked around his office at the faces of his officers and realized that they had all been completely defeated by an enemy they could not see, could not fight, and could not understand. Director So Young sat in her office on Earth watching the news feeds from across the galaxy, and she could barely contain her excitement as reports poured in about the collapse of imperial authority on world after world. What had started as a simple defensive strategy against one invasion fleet had somehow triggered the largest bureaucratic revolution in galactic history, and she was amazed at how quickly things were spiraling out of control. Her assistant knocked on the door and entered, carrying a communication device that was blinking with dozens of incoming priority messages. Director, we are receiving independence declarations from conquered worlds at a rate of 12 per hour, and the number is accelerating. Our galactic paperwork resistance network has reached over 300 worlds now. So Young nodded with satisfaction and activated her main communication console. The screen filled with dozens of small windows showing representatives from worlds across the galaxy, and all of them looked eager to speak with her. She had never imagined that teaching other species about proper legal procedures would be so popular. Good morning, everyone, she said warmly to the assembled representatives. I understand many of you have questions about filing for independence from the Galactic Empire. A reptilian alien from the Zephyrian system raised his hand and spoke in accented but clear language. Director So Young, this is Compliance Officer J1 from the Zephyrian Independence Movement, and we have successfully filed Form 7734 for request for independence based on improper conquest documentation. However, the Imperial Governor is claiming our paperwork is invalid because we did not have legal authority to file independence forms. So, Young smiled and pulled out a thick manual from her desk. Compliance Officer J1, that is an excellent question, and the answer can be found in Section 445 of the Interstellar Legal Code. Any population that has been conquered without proper documentation automatically gains the right to self-determination under the Unlawful Occupation Recovery Act. A blue-skinned alien from another window spoke, up next. Director, this is Manager Yun Seo from the Andromedan Liberation Council, and we are having trouble with our economic impact assessment forms. The Imperial tax collectors are demanding that we pay occupation fees, even though we are filing for independence. Manager Yun Seo, you need to submit Form 8765 exemption for tax relief during independence proceedings, So Young replied helpfully. This form creates a legal hold on all tax obligations until your independence petition is resolved. I will have our training department send you the complete instruction packet. The communication console chimed with an incoming priority transmission, and the face of Admiral Kyung Ho appeared in a new window. He looked exhausted and his uniform was wrinkled, but he seemed strangely calm compared to their previous conversations. Director, So Young, I am calling to request a formal meeting between Imperial representatives and Earth's compliance office, the Admiral said politely. We would like to discuss possible solutions to our current legal situation. So Young raised her eyebrows, in surprise. Admiral, that is a very reasonable request. Are you prepared to acknowledge that your conquest operations have been conducted without proper legal documentation? Yes, Kyung Ho replied without hesitation. We are prepared to acknowledge that the Galactic Empire may have made some errors in our expansion procedures over the past 5 centuries. Compliance Officer Jae-won leaned forward in his window and spoke directly to the Admiral. Admiral Kyung Ho, my people have been under Imperial rule for 200 years without any legal justification. What do you intend to do about compensation for unlawful occupation? We are prepared to negotiate compensation packages as part of a comprehensive settlement agreement, the Admiral replied carefully. However, we need Earth's assistance in developing a manageable payment plan, since our current obligations exceed the total galactic economy. Manager Yun Seo joined the conversation from her window. Admiral, what about the worlds that want complete independence? Will the Empire agree to withdraw all military forces and administrative personnel? Admiral Kyung Ho sighed deeply before answering. Manager Eun Seo, the Empire is not in a position to prevent independence declarations at this time. Our military budget has been frozen due to audit issues, and most of our administrative personnel are busy filling out tax compliance forms. So Young could hardly believe what she was hearing. The mighty Galactic Empire was essentially admitting defeat and agreeing to negotiate with conquered worlds that had never been able to resist Imperial power before. Her paperwork revolution had accomplished something that centuries of military rebellion had failed to achieve. Admiral, she said carefully, are you saying that the Empire is willing to recognize the independence of any world that files proper paperwork? Director So Young, at this point we will recognize the independence of any world that can prove their conquest was conducted without proper legal documentation, Kyung Ho confirmed. We simply do not have the resources to contest 800 separate legal challenges while dealing with our tax audit situation. A new voice joined the conversation as Captain Sung Ho contacted them from Imperial Fleet Operations. Director, Admiral, I have urgent news from across the Empire. We are receiving reports that 93% of our conquered territories have now filed independence petitions, and another 47 worlds are demanding immediate withdrawal of Imperial forces. 93%? Admiral Kyung Ho repeated weakly. Yes, sir, and our legal department estimates that we are facing over 4,000 separate lawsuits for unlawful occupation, improper conquest procedures, tax evasion, environmental damage, cultural destruction, and emotional distress. They recommend immediate settlement negotiations. Compliance Officer J1 looked pleased with this development. Admiral, it sounds like your empire is falling apart quite rapidly. Perhaps this would be a good time to discuss formal dissolution procedures. Dissolution procedures? The Admiral asked. So Young consulted her computer terminal and pulled up the appropriate forms. Compliance Officer J1 raises an interesting point, Admiral. If the Galactic Empire was never properly established according to legal procedures, then it may be necessary to dissolve the organization entirely and allow member worlds to form their own governments. How would that work? Admiral Kyung-ho asked with growing interest. Well, we have Form 1234 Dissolution for Voluntary Termination of Interstellar Political Organizations, So Young explained. It requires consent from at least 75% of member territories and approval from the Galactic Legal Council. Manager Yoon Seo looked excited. How do we establish a Galactic Legal Council if one does not currently exist? That would require Form 2345 Council for establishment of interstellar governing body, So Young replied. Any group of 12 or more worlds can petition to form a legal council for their region of space. Captain Sung-ho's voice became urgent. Director, Admiral, I am receiving emergency transmissions from Imperial Command. General In-ho reports that the Imperial Treasury is completely empty, and they cannot pay the salaries of military personnel or administrative staff. He is requesting permission to file for bankruptcy protection. Admiral Kyung-ho closed his eyes and rubbed his temples. Captain, inform General In-ho that he has permission to file whatever forms are necessary to resolve our financial situation. At this point, bankruptcy may be our most practical option. Sir, what about the invasion fleet here at Earth? What are our orders regarding the conquest operation? The Admiral looked directly at So Young through the communication screen. Director, would you be willing to accept an application for withdrawal of military forces and cancellation of conquest operations? So Young smiled warmly. Of course, Admiral. That would be Form 3456 withdrawal, and it only requires 17 pages of documentation plus a formal apology letter to the affected population. Only 17 pages? Admiral Kyung-ho asked, with what sounded like relief. Yes, it is one of our simpler forms. We designed it to encourage peaceful resolution of military conflicts. Compliance Officer Jae-won raised his hand again. Director So Young, if the Galactic Empire files for dissolution, what happens to all the independence petitions that various worlds have submitted? Excellent question, Compliance Officer Jae-won. If the Empire dissolves voluntarily, all member territories automatically gain independent status without needing separate petitions. However, they would still be eligible for compensation claims under the Unlawful Occupation Recovery Act. Manager Yoon Seo looked thoughtful. Director, would Earth be willing to help coordinate a new interstellar government that actually follows proper legal procedures from the beginning? So Young considered this question carefully. Manager Yoon Seo, Earth would be honored to assist in establishing a new galactic government based on proper bureaucratic principles. We have extensive experience in organizational management and regulatory compliance. Admiral Kyung-ho laughed for the first time in months, and the sound was not entirely pleasant. Director So Young, I think you have just conquered the entire galaxy using nothing but paperwork and good intentions. I am not sure whether to surrender formally or apply for a job with your compliance office. Admiral. Coordinator Ji-hoon stood at the podium in the vast conference hall that had been constructed specifically for the signing of the Treaty of Terra, and he looked out at the most unusual gathering in galactic history. Representatives from 847 worlds sat at tables arranged in perfect rows, and each delegate had their own stack of documents that needed to be signed, initialed, stamped, and witnessed, according to proper legal procedures. 2. Years had passed since Admiral Kyung-ho first encountered Director Jin-woo and his forms, and the galaxy had been completely transformed by what historians were already calling the bureaucratic revolution. The Galactic Empire had officially dissolved 6 months ago, After filing Form 1234 dissolution and paying the required processing fees, and now every world was free to govern itself according to whatever legal system they preferred. "Ladies, gentlemen, and respected beings of all species," Ji-hoon announced into his microphone, "we are gathered here today to witness the signing of the Treaty of Terra, which will establish the new Galactic Administrative Council and create a framework for peaceful cooperation between all member worlds." Former Admiral Kyung-ho sat at the front table wearing a new uniform, with the insignia of Director of Imperial Compliance Reform, and he looked surprisingly comfortable in his new role. His former invasion fleet had been converted into a mobile bureaucracy that traveled between worlds, helping them establish proper governmental procedures and fill out the paperwork required for independence. Ambassador Che-rin approached the podium carrying a document that was so large it required its own wheeled cart. "Coordinator Ji-hoon, I am pleased to present the final version of the Treaty of Terra for signature by all assembled representatives. The document consists of 47,000 pages covering all aspects of interstellar law, trade regulations, diplomatic procedures, and administrative protocols." A murmur went through the assembled crowd as delegates realized the sheer size of the document they were expected to sign. Compliance Officer Jae-won raised his hand from the Zephyrian delegation table. "Ambassador Che-rin, how long will it take for every representative to sign and initial all the required pages?" "Our scheduling department estimates approximately 6 months if we work in shifts around the clock," Che-rin replied cheerfully. "Each page requires signatures from all 847 delegates plus witnesses and notary stamps. We have prepared comfortable sleeping quarters for delegates who will be staying for the duration of the signing process." Manager Yoon Seo from the Andromedan delegation looked concerned. "Ambassador, what happens if someone makes a mistake while signing? Do we have to start over?" "Not at all." Manager Yoon Seo, Che-rin assured her. "We have Form 5678 correction for signature. Error amendments. Any mistakes can be corrected by filing the appropriate paperwork and obtaining approval from the Treaty Review Committee." Director Kyung-ho stood up and addressed the assembly. "Fellow delegates, I want to thank Earth's representatives for their patience in helping all of us understand proper legal procedures. Before we begin the signing process, I would like to formally apologize on behalf of the former Galactic Empire for our failure to follow appropriate bureaucratic protocols during our expansion operations." The hall erupted in applause, and several delegates wiped tears from their eyes as they heard the official apology they had been waiting centuries to receive. Director So Young stepped forward carrying a certificate that she presented to Kyung-ho. "Director Kyung-ho, on behalf of Earth and all the worlds affected by Imperial expansion, we accept your apology and we are pleased to present you with this certificate of bureaucratic excellence in recognition of your outstanding improvement in administrative procedures." Kyung-ho accepted the certificate with obvious emotion and returned to his seat. Archivist Sun Woo approached the podium next, carrying several more boxes of documents that needed to be processed before the signing could begin. "Delegates, before we can proceed with the treaty signing, we need to complete a few preliminary forms," Sun Woo announced. "Form 6789, attendance for official verification of delegate presence, Form 7890, authority for confirmation of signing authorization, and Form 8901, witness for designation of official document observers." A collective sigh went up from the assembled delegates, but they dutifully began filling out the required paperwork. After months of dealing with Earth's administrative procedures, most species had developed efficient bureaucratic systems of their own, and the forms were completed relatively quickly. 6 months later, Coordinator Ji-hoon stood at the same podium watching as the final signatures were added to the Treaty of Terra. The massive document had grown during the signing process as various delegates suggested amendments, clarifications, and additional provisions that required their own subsections and appendices. "I am pleased to announce that the Treaty of Terra has been successfully signed by all member worlds," Ji-hoon declared, and the hall erupted in celebration. The Galactic Administrative Council is now officially established with headquarters on Earth and regional offices on 47 worlds throughout the galaxy. Ambassador Che-rin stepped forward with another announcement. "The Treaty of Terra establishes several important principles for interstellar relations. First, all military conflicts must be resolved through proper legal channels using Form 9012 dispute for peaceful resolution of interstellar disagreements. Second, Any world wishing to establish trade relations must file Form 9123 Trade for commercial partnership applications. Third, all interstellar travel requires Form 9234 Travel for movement authorization between member worlds. Director Kyung-ho raised his hand. Ambassador Chae-rin, what happens if someone tries to start a war without filing the proper paperwork? Excellent question, Director, Chae-rin replied. According to Article 247, Section 15 of the treaty, any attempt to initiate military action without proper documentation will result in immediate economic sanctions, trade embargo, and referral to the Galactic Court of Administrative Justice. Manager Yoon Seo looked impressed. How long does it take to get approval for Form 9012 dispute? The standard processing time is 18 months, Chae-rin answered. However, urgent disputes can be expedited to 12 months if all parties submit Form 9345 Expedite for Accelerated Resolution Request. Compliance Officer Jae-won smiled broadly. Ambassador, I think you have made war practically impossible through administrative procedures alone. That was certainly our intention, Compliance Officer Jae-won. We believe that requiring proper paperwork before military action creates a natural cooling-off period that allows diplomatic solutions to emerge. Archivist Sun Woo approached the Yo podium carrying one final document. Delegates, I am required to inform you that the Treaty of Terra has been classified as a restricted access document pending completion of Security Review Form 001, which evaluates the treaty for potential security implications. How long does the security review process take? Several delegates asked simultaneously. Form 001 has not been updated since its creation in 2387. And it references several technologies and procedures that have not been invented yet, Sun Woo explained. Our legal department estimates that the review process will take approximately 250 years unless we can locate the original forms and update them to current standards. Director Kyung-ho started laughing, and the sound spread throughout the hall as delegates realized what the archivist was telling them. They had just signed the most important treaty in galactic history, and it would be classified as secret for the next 2.5 centuries because of outdated paperwork. Archivist Sun Woo, Kyung-ho called out, does this mean that we are not allowed to tell anyone about the treaty we just signed? That is correct, Director. However, you can file Form 9456 Disclosure for permission to discuss classified administrative documents if you need to reference the treaty in official communications. Ambassador Chae-rin stepped forward one final time. Delegates, despite the classification issue, I want to congratulate all of you on successfully establishing the most comprehensive bureaucratic framework in galactic history. Under the Treaty of Terra, every aspect of interstellar relations is now governed by proper administrative procedures and appropriate documentation requirements. As the delegates prepared to leave the conference hall, many of them stopped to thank Earth's representatives for teaching them how to use paperwork as a tool for peace and justice. The galaxy was finally at peace not because everyone had learned to love each other, but because starting a war now required filling out so many forms that nobody had the patience to bother with military conflict anymore. Coordinator Ji-hoon watched the last delegates file out of the hall, and he smiled with satisfaction. Earth had accomplished something that no military power in galactic history had ever managed. They had created a system where bureaucracy was stronger than any weapon and where the pen truly was mightier than the sword. The age of galactic war was over, and the age of galactic paperwork had begun.